Universities are integral to the UK's economy and international reputation, global standing. Yet the question has been posed, it was posed this morning in the Financial Times, are universities too big to fail? And have they become too homogenous to merit anything other than acceptance? The problem about universities is their universality and the assumption that one university is equal to another, which in some ways they are. Are universities social building blocks, or are they institutes of education and a way to measure and define educational merit? Nearly half of UK universities are operating at a loss and face severe financial difficulties. So the notion that they are too big to fail echoes the 2007 financial crisis, where banks, despite the official rhetoric, were bailed out to prevent systemic collapse. And universities, much like banks, are deeply embedded in the economic and social fabric of our country. They employ thousands, support local economies. They're vital to the research and the development that drives innovation. And a collapse would not just jeopardize these wider support roles, but they would also create significant liabilities, unfinished student loans, potential demands for compensation by alumni, the broader economic fallout. These are just a few of the challenges that could arise. Moreover, the international dimension cannot be ignored. Overseas students are a critical revenue stream, and subsidizing research and the education of domestic students is really what they are doing. So to cut back on international students is to cut off our own nose. The exodus of international students in the event of institutional failure will destabilize the entire sector. The destruction of one university in the event of failure will destabilize the entire sector. Despite the diversity in location, size, focus, despite the fact that some universities are really old and some universities are former polytechnics or colleges, many universities have pursued similar growth strategies post-2012 when tuition fees were tripled. This expansion, often fueled by low-interest loans and sale of assets, has led to a proliferation of facilities and campuses, but this growth has not always been underpinned by robust financial planning, and it has led to precarious situations such as the ones we find ourselves in today, where universities are severely in threat. The question of whether universities have become too similar in their approach is pertinent. The drive for expansion, the reliance on international students, the focus on profitability have created an atmosphere, a landscape, where institutions, despite their differences, face similar challenges and are competing with one another. This homogeneity is dangerous because it leaves the entire sector vulnerable to the same risks at the same time, such as changes in government policies, economic downturns, shifts in global student mobility. Adding to these is the financial and strategic challenge of the student visa, and the process of acceptance on the one hand by universities, followed by rejection or complications from the government Home Office, creates uncertainty and stress for students. Why come here if you can go somewhere else which will not yield so much stress, which will not see such a tardy process of the application at such expense, followed by a rejection on spurious grounds? This issue is not just a bureaucratic inconvenience, it has real implications for universities that rely heavily on international students. Now, I'm saying this because I have experience of international students having rejections after not only after getting their application approved by the university, but even halfway through their university period, even halfway through their general education. And it is chaotic. In fact, years ago, I went to Mrs. May about precisely this. And I got the impression from speaking to Mrs. May and formerly and initially to Andrea Leadsom that the assumption in the Home Office was that these students are already trapped in the system. It doesn't matter what you do to them, they will come back begging because they've already spent so much money. And if that means that they come back and do an extra year, well, that's to everybody's benefit, isn't it? And that's a sort of cynical assumption which I think is beneath us. And because the Home Office and the government works on the principle of statistics rather than the real principle of the way we engage with real lives, there is no change because people look at the statistics. And the statistics look very positive. We still have a record number of international students. But a record number of international students doing what? Contributing how? If we get it right, these international students come here, they go back to their own country and they act as unofficial apologists, unofficial ambassadors for British values. Sometimes they come here and they will contribute directly to our economy. They will work here, they will pay tax. If we get it wrong, these people have the have the sense and the reach to tell others how bad it is, how bad it can be. And people will go in their swarms to Canada, to America, to Australia. That's just to name the universities that use English as a major language. Many of the universities in Europe now primarily teach in English. We need to make our universities more attractive to this sector if we rely on them. And we rely on international students. Be in no doubt about it. It doesn't matter whether you fly the flag for Farage. You will be contributing to the death of the British University if you deny foreign students access or make it so difficult that they simply don't want to come. And then you've got the question of which university is worthwhile. There are some universities which are piddlingly ridiculous. And there are some universities that are so ingrained in the national identity that it doesn't matter what course you study in those universities, you have the merit of that banner, that flag, that certificate. We've also got to remember that in Britain we think of the content of the education, we think of what we've learnt, we think of the experience. In most countries, the certificate is more important than the experience. It's an irony. And that's one reason why this proliferation of fake certificates is so prevalent, because the certificate is everything. Here, I don't think I collected my certificates from Oxford until years after I'd actually graduated. And I still don't think I have certificates from a number of other universities, of which one of them is not even in this country. Because for some reason, it sort of drilled into us from a very early age that certificates are simply the icing on the cake. They're not the cake. The cake is what you learnt. And what do you learn in a university? You don't learn content. That's the doorway through which you access education. You learn methodology. And it's that methodology which sticks. Partly because the content changes. Over time, the content, the stuff you learnt 40 years ago, is no longer relevant. Better stuff has been discovered. But the methodology can be adapted to deal with that better stuff. So, the current visa policies need to change because this oppression is actually destroying our institutions. The restrictions on the student family visa, which have further strained universities' abilities to attract and retain students from abroad, particularly for master's and doctorate degrees, exacerbating the financial woes. And remember, often when we're looking at universities from afar, we think of universities as a place you go for a bachelor's degree. A university is measured on its research. And if we can't get that right, and we've already shot ourselves in the foot by exiling ourselves from European research, so we actually have to double the amount of research we're doing simply to stand still. While the government may express a willingness to let failing universities collapse, the reality is much more complex. The economic, the social, the reputational implications of such a failure would likely force intervention, a necessary intervention, because we could not see these universities, even small universities, collapse because of that wider support structure. But it doesn't negate the need for reform. Universities must diversify their strategies. They must improve their financial management. They must adapt to changing circumstances to avoid the fate of being a homogeneous blob on the brink of failure. Universities should be about individual talent rather than groupthink. Groupthink is the stuff of Orwell, not Oxford.